I'm Mike Niehaus, and today I'll be talking to you about deploying Windows 8. As part of today's discussion, we want to break down the discussion into a few different areas. We want to talk about why you want to deploy Windows 8 and what obstacles get in the way. Then we can talk about preparing for that deployment, how we can help customers figure out what they have in their environment, and to decide what's best for them to deploy now that they have some choices. Finally, after we get through that, we can talk about how to actually do the deployment using the tools that we have available. So first, let's try to make the case for Windows 8 deployment. There are two distinct groups of customers out there, those that are still using Windows XP and those that are currently running Windows 7. As you've already heard in the previous sessions, there are great reasons for both groups to adopt Windows 8, but the challenges are typically greater for those still running Windows XP. So let's then talk a little bit about Windows XP. You had to go all the way back to the year 2001 when it was released. And what was state of the art then is really no longer state of the art today. So how many of you are still using the original Xbox or the original Pocket PC that came out in that year? How many are you still using the original digital cameras and MP3 players that have been around since then? But XP is still around. People are still making use of that. It was a great product for its time, offering all kinds of new features around wireless networking and USB 2.0 support. Even if you jump forward a few years to 2004 when Windows XP SP2 was released, which added a firewall and brand new Internet Explorer 6.0, there was still a lot of changes going on. But it's not just about what they're using, it's also about how they're deploying it. Sadly, a lot of customers are still using the same deployment process that they started using when they originally adopted Windows XP. While that process may have served them well over the years, it's often fairly inefficient. So what does that process look like? For some customers, it's nothing more than buying a new PC, taking it out of the box, plugging it in, and turning it on. Some realized that that was inefficient and started using sector-based imaging tools to capture tweaked images from each new model of computer that they purchased. But that's how we've gotten to a state where the average customer is now maintaining dozens of unique Windows XP images. Only the most advanced customers figured out that there's a better way. Fewer images means less maintenance, more automation means less wasted time on each machine, and more productive users as a result. Fortunately, in the 11 years since Windows XP has been released, we figured out how to do it better. We now have free tools like the Assessment and Deployment Kit, or ADK, and the Microsoft Deployment Kit, also called MDT, that make creating single images possible and actually fairly easy to do. We've also added technologies that reduce deployment time so that they're now measured in minutes instead of hours. But the most important thing to remember is that there's an important date coming up, April 8th, 2014. That's when Windows XP will no longer be supported. That's currently less than 600 days away. That might sound like a long time, but in reality, deployment projects can take a while before all the computers in the org have been fully migrated to the latest version of Windows. So customers are quickly running out of time. You need to help them figure out the path forward. So why don't people migrate from Windows XP or any other older version of Windows that they might be running today? Usually the reasons are tied either to the cost of the migration or to the uncertainties of moving to a new version of Windows. Will their applications work? Will the computers support Windows 8? How do I actually perform the deployment? With all these questions, they can often get stuck before their deployment project even gets started. So that's really where partners can help, adding to the customer's confidence by showing them that their applications will work, that their computers are able to run Windows 8, and that we do have free tools to assist with all parts of the deployment project. Most importantly, that we can reduce the effort required and as a result reduce the overall costs for doing the deployment. So before we talk more about the deployment process, let's take a look at a typical deployment scenario. We have a computer running Windows XP. It has everything on it that I need to do my job. It has my data, it has my applications. But it's time to move forward to Windows 8. How can that be done? Using only free Windows deployment tools, I can create a USB key containing everything that I need to deploy the new Windows 8 operating system. The applications that I need to install, the drivers for my computer, and everything attached to it. So all I need to do to start the Windows 8 deployment process is insert the key. So when we insert the USB key, we get a prompt asking us what we want to do. In this case, we want to run the Windows Deployment Wizard. So I can click OK, and that will start the deployment process. where it will present a simple wizard where I can answer a few questions about the deployment, and it'll then be on its way. So I can choose to deploy Windows 8 Enterprise Evaluation x64, specify that I want to automatically capture the user state, keeping it local when possible. I could create a complete backup of the computer just so that I have something to retrieve anything that I might have missed in the deployment process. I could choose any optional language packs that I wanted to install, and specify some basic information about the operating system configuration, select any optional applications that I want to install, which in this case includes a Windows 8 application called Rounds, and then we're ready to go. So at this point, we'll click Begin to kick off the actual deployment, and that will run for about 20 to 30 minutes before the machine has been completely migrated to Windows 8. So we'll come back to that later to see what the results of that process are, and we'll also look later at the deployment tools that we made use of to actually create that USB stick. So while that deployment's running, let's start talking about the assessment and planning process, getting ready for Windows 8 deployment. The process is all about eliminating uncertainty, letting customers feel more comfortable that Windows 8 will work as expected in their environment, with their hardware and with their applications. Fortunately, we can start from a fairly good position. We know that Windows 8 has the same hardware requirements as Windows 7. We know that the Windows deployment process itself is nearly identical between Windows 7 and Windows 8. So those that know how to deploy Windows 7 already know how to deploy Windows 8 too. We also know that software compatibility between Windows 7 and Windows 8, and even between Windows XP and Windows 8, is very good. But you know that organizations aren't really going to take our word for it. They want to confirm that themselves. Over the past few years, we've realized that trying to reach 100% confidence level by testing all the applications really isn't practical. If you attempt that, your deployment projects slow down to a standstill as you're trying to confirm that every single application you have is compatible. So it's important to prioritize. Using free tools, we can identify all the computers and all the software in an organization, but then you need to review that list to figure out what's important and what isn't. For business critical applications, maybe those that generate paychecks, performing well-structured testing is a necessity. But there are many cases where that's not worth the time and effort. Instead, you can adopt a more reactive approach. Assume that the applications will work, and if any issues are found after the deployment has completed, these application issues can be investigated and remediated as they come up. That's what we mean by an organic testing process. So where's the line between critical applications that need the structured testing and the less critical ones where that testing can be deferred? Our consultants have come up with a formula. If the cost of the failure times the probability of the failure is greater than the estimated cost of the structured testing, then do the structured testing. Otherwise, save your time and energy and wait to see if any issues crop up. So what percentage of applications need structured testing? That one's really going to vary by organization, but the percentage should be significantly less than 100%. If you find issues either through the organic testing or structured testing processes, oftentimes these can be fixed with minimal effort using shims. Windows ships with literally thousands of predefined shim fixes already defined, and using free tools you can define even more. That doesn't mean you can fix 100% of the problems though, so there may be some instances where applications need to be upgraded. One of the key free tools for helping with the assessment and remediation process is the Application Compatibility Toolkit, or ACT. This tool has multiple components. First, it includes an inventory tool that can tell you what software and hardware are present in an organization. But it takes it further too. You can sync this information with the cloud and get information from the vendors, from Microsoft, and even from other customers related to the compatibility of that software. This can be a great filter. If a large number of customers have already reported that the application works well on Windows 8, why do you need to do any structured testing to confirm the same thing? Another component of ACT is the Compatibility Administrator. This is the tool that you can use to fix applications, creating those shim definitions that can fix many common problems. Maybe it's because the application thinks that it must run as an administrator. Maybe it performs a check of the Windows version number. Regardless of what types of issues you encountered, there are probably shims that can be applied. There are also shim bundles, so maybe you can take an easy approach and say, well, let's just try a Windows XP SP3 shim bundle to apply that to the application to see if the application works properly when it thinks it's running on Windows XP. So we've also included a picture here of what the ACT information looks like. So as we collect the ACT inventory, we can sync it with the cloud and get the details about compatibility back. This includes details on both 32-bit and 64-bit compatibility, the vendor's assessment, and feedback from other customers. Another free tool that can help with the assessment process is the Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit, also called MAP. This solution accelerator gathers information from remote computers without installing anything on them, which makes it perfect for partners who want to show customers what's present in their organizations. MAP takes it further than this too, enabling the generation of assessment reports and even deployment project proposals. Here's an example showing information collected by MAP from an enterprise customer. For this information, we can see that only a small number of computers aren't ready for Windows 8, and then we can drill into those and see what it would take to make them ready, which typically includes adding more memory or similar types of hardware adjustments. If you're wondering about the machines with insufficient data, those are computers that were discovered from Active Directory but couldn't be reached. Maybe they no longer exist and the customer needs to clean up their directory objects. Maybe they're laptops that aren't currently on the corporate network, or maybe they just aren't currently turned on. Running the inventory scan multiple times using the MAP tool can help with this, and it will often find new machines each time. Keep in mind that customers may already be using System Center Configuration Manager or Windows Intune. As a result, they may already have inventory that can be used as part of the deployment planning process. These tools can also help with the deployment of the ACT collector and assessment tools. Next, we need to discuss what Windows Edition a customer should deploy, since this has a great impact on how that deployment can be done. It's important to understand that there are 3 different ways to purchase Windows. Through the OEM channel, you can purchase Windows RT or Windows Pro, preloaded at the factory. Through retailers, you can purchase Windows 8 Pro, which can be customized and deployed with a different product key for each machine. Or you can purchase Windows 8 Pro or Windows 8 Enterprise through a volume license program, which provides the most flexibility. In the OEM case, the deployment process is really pretty simple. We're back to that concept of just unboxing the computer, plugging it in, and turning it on. For Windows 8 Pro, you could then join it to a domain and turn on BitLocker. The next step would be to connect it to the management infrastructure, such as Windows Intune, for ongoing management. Then you could install the needed applications, restore any user data, and just get the machine back in the state where it's usable. This can be a time-consuming process, though. As a result, it's typically only used at organizations that don't know how to do it any better. So that's really going to be the key. We need to teach them how. In the retail case, organizations can also drive to their nearest retailer and purchase Windows 8 full package product off the shelf. There are then 2 ways to use it. You can upgrade each computer using a different product key for each machine, or you can perform a clean install. In the upgrade case, if you're upgrading for Windows 7, you can preserve all your user data, settings, and applications as part of the upgrade process. But if you're upgrading from XP or Vista, only the user data is going to be kept. The applications would still need to be reinstalled after the upgrade process completes. When performing a clean install, the process is pretty much the same as with OEM editions. You could use free tools like the ADK and MDT to create and deploy custom images, but these tools are really better suited for volume license editions. So let's talk a little bit more about those. We would always recommend that organizations deploy Windows 8 using volume license editions. Both Windows 8 Pro and Windows 8 Enterprise can be obtained through these channels. Windows 8 Pro is targeting smaller organizations. Windows 8 Enterprise targets larger customers. Using volume license versions provides the most flexibility because you can automatically activate using either Active Directory-based activation or KMS. And you can also use MAC or multiple activation keys for groups of computers that aren't on your organization's network. However you do it, it's much easier than dealing with long lists of product keys like you would have with retail versions of Windows 8. Imaging rights are also more relaxed when using volume license editions. So this is really where we want organizations to end up. We want them to leverage these volume license versions of Windows. Let's talk a little bit more about the two options for moving from Windows XP or Windows 7 to Windows 8. First, when you're doing an upgrade, you need to understand that when coming from Windows XP, only user data can be migrated automatically. When coming from Windows 7, data, settings, and applications are migrated. Another limitation in the upgrade process is you can only use the original Windows media to do this. You can't use a custom image because the upgrade process has no way of knowing how to merge in custom items in the image, like applications, with the items being migrated from your old operating system. There have been lots of performance improvements in the Windows 8 upgrade process, so it is much faster than it was before, which makes it more practical as compared to previous versions of Windows. But primarily, it's only designed for use for a small number of Windows 7 to Windows 8 upgrades. Most mid to large size organizations opt instead for a clean install so that they can start fresh. To do this requires reinstalling applications as part of the deployment process to make sure that the machine is immediately useful for the person who's going to receive the new operating system. This process can and should be automated. Users shouldn't be forced to do it themselves. User data also needs to be migrated from the old operating system to the new one. Fortunately, with the hard link migration capabilities built into the deployment tools, this process can be very fast even when migrating many gigabytes of data. While some customers deploy the images provided by Microsoft directly off of the media, which you can download from the Volume License Service Center, most organizations end up creating, capturing, and deploying custom images. It's primarily done for speed. You can include key software like Office in the image, and you can also pre-install all the latest security updates so that those don't need to be installed when the operating system starts up for the first time. Creating these images is pretty simple using the free tools that we provide. So now we need to talk about how. And surprisingly, this is the easy part, as we have some great free tools to help with that process. So what do these tools really need to do? Well, they need to deploy Windows 8 while automatically migrating user data and installing applications so there's no lost productivity. This will be a clean installation, removing any remnants of the old OS and old applications. And we want to spend as little time as possible at each machine because time is money. We want as much automation as possible. The goal is to complete the whole process in less than 30 minutes. In a lot of cases, this is doable. There will be some where there is going to take a longer period of time because of the number of applications that need to be installed or the speed of the machine or whatever the cause, but we at least want to start with a process that's capable of doing an OS deployment within 30 minutes. So how exactly do we do that? Well, that's where these key deployment tools come in. The first of those tools is the Assessment and Deployment Kit, or the ADK. You really can't deploy Windows without it. It contains all of the key tools that are necessary for anyone to deploy Windows. And it really becomes the foundation then for anyone who is looking at creating custom images, capturing custom images, and deploying those custom images. So included in the ADK are tools like the Windows pre-installation environment, which enables you to run a thin operating system on the hardware before the full operating system's been installed. You also have imaging tools like ImageX that can capture and apply file-based images. The user state migration tool that has been mentioned a couple of times as we've gone along enables you to capture and restore the user state using hard links. The AppCompat toolkit that we talked about previously is actually shipped as part of the Assessment and Deployment Kit as well. So all of these essential free tools are going to be used as part of the deployment process. The next piece then is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. This becomes another layer on top of those ADK tools that provides that whole end-to-end process for doing the OS deployment. So how do you take those individual tools from the ADK and tie them together into the full process that we can make use of to deploy Windows 8 to the computers? Just like the ADK, this is a free tool. It's a solution accelerator designed for building and deploying operating systems. That can be done using a light touch deployment process like we're running through here on the laptop that we're migrating to Windows 8. And it can also do a zero-touch process where there's absolutely no user interaction, typically used with System Center Configuration Manager. So now that we've talked about the assessment and deployment kit and MDT, let's switch back over to our demo and see how it's going. As we can see on the screen, our deployment's complete, and it's completed successfully with no errors and no warnings. And when we click Finish, it will log out and show us that we are in Windows 8. And then we can log back in, as myself in this case, to see if everything's been migrated as we expect. The first time we log into Windows 8, we get a nice animation to tell us how to use Windows 8. As soon as that animation's complete, then we'll be able to see the desktop and look at to make sure that the user data and applications that we had requested are present on the machine. Okay, so now we can see that Windows 8's fully loaded, and if we switch over to the desktop, we can see that the user data was restored. So I have the items that I had requested there. If I look in my Documents folder, I can see that my data files have been restored. And if I go back to the Start screen, I can see the additional application that I requested has been installed. So the deployment was successful. We have everything that we want. So now that we've seen the deployment, let's take a look at the server where we set all this up. So how did we create that USB stick? If we look on the desktop of the machine that we configured this on, we can see the software that we've installed. The two main pieces are the ones that we already talked about. The assessment and deployment kit's been installed on this computer, and the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit 2012 Update 1's also been installed. Just to see which components we've installed from the assessment and deployment kit, we can click on the Change button, and it'll show us that we've installed the deployment tools, which includes DISM and OSCD image and tools like that, Windows pre-installation environment, and the user state migration tool. So those are the three key pieces for building the USB stick. The other tools that we talked about earlier, the AppCompat toolkit, they're also present here, and we could install them just by checking them, and the pieces that we would need would get downloaded. But we've got what we need to build the stick already installed. So let's cancel out of that and switch over to MDT. So this is the MDT deployment workbench. This is where we would create initially a deployment share, where this deployment share contains all the pieces necessary to deploy the operating systems that we want. So in this case, I've imported 3 different operating systems. Windows XP, so that I can put the original operating system on the machine. Windows 7, in case I wanted to show how to go from Windows 7 to Windows 8. And then the Windows 8 Enterprise Evaluation pieces as well. After that, I can add in the drivers that I need for each of the operating systems for the machine that I was using to run the demo. So in this case, I've imported the drivers for an Asus UX31 machine into the deployment workbench for Windows XP x86, a different set of drivers for Windows 7 x64, and a third set of drivers for Windows 8 x64. In this case, the Windows 8 drivers are actually all included in Windows 8, so I didn't even need to include any for Windows 8. But for the older operating systems, the devices are newer than that, so I did need to find and import those drivers. The next piece that I might want to add are any packages that I want to install. This could be language packs. In this case, I've got a Spanish language pack that I've imported, or it could be security updates that I want to install as part of the deployment process. For all of these, all I really need to do to add these is right-click and choose to import OS packages, right-click, choose import drivers, right-click, import operating systems, and the same goes for applications as well. In the case of the application that I deployed as part of my Windows deployment, I just imported the source files that I needed for that and specified for the command line the name of the application that I wanted to install. In this case, this is a Windows 8 application. We can tell that by the file extension here of .appx. And MDT understands that anytime you're trying to install a Windows 8 application or an appx file, that it needs to run the necessary DISM commands to do that. So once we put all of those pieces in, the applications, the operating systems, the drivers, and the packages, we then just need to tie them together with a task sequence. So I've created 3 task sequences, one for each operating system that I might want to deploy. In the case of Windows XP, it contains all the standard steps that we use to perform an OS migration. We do a few extra steps in here to create the necessary accounts that we use as part of the demo, and we also restore some user data onto the old operating system just so that we have something that we can migrate to the new operating system. Same basic setup for Windows 7. In the Windows 8 case, all we really need to do is use the standard OS deployment task sequence that MDT creates. So we've got all the files necessary to do the deployment, and the next step generally would be to run the update deployment share process to generate the Windows PE boot images and ISOs that we would need to do a network deployment. But in this case, we chose to do a USB deployment. So there's a couple extra steps required to do that. So now we just need to go to the Advanced Configuration node, and from there click on Media. The first time that we would do this, we would need to say that we want to create new media and specify a path to create it at. Since I've already done that, we can look at the one that I've created. And really that's all we specified. We specified where to put it and what to put on it. So in this case, all 3 of my operating systems become part of this media. We'll generate an x86 boot image, which is good because we want to be able to deploy Windows XP x86. And also a x64 boot image, which we'll use to deploy Windows 7 and Windows 8. I unchecked the option here to generate an ISO because we're not actually going to create an ISO to do the deployment. We're using a USB key. If you wanted to use a DVD instead, you could take this ISO and you could burn it to a DVD and do the deployment that way. So after we've done that, we need to right-click on the media item and say to update media content. That will take all the files from the main deployment share and copy them into a staging folder for the media. As soon as that process finishes, we can then take that staging folder and copy it over to the USB key. That'll take a few seconds here, only because it's already determined that all the files necessary are present. So we can click Finish on that wizard and switch over to the hard drive on the system, where we can see on the C drive there is a media folder, which is the folder that I told it to create, and inside of that folder is a content folder that contains everything that we want to put on the USB key. So the next step after that would be to insert the USB key and format it, which we could do on any machine running Windows 7 or Server 2012 or newer, and then just copy all the content from one place to the other, which we could just do by drag and drop. In this case, I've already got all the content on this USB key, so it's ready to go, ready to deploy. So we've talked about the Assessment and Deployment Kit, we've talked about the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and in the demo we walked through the steps necessary for you to create your own deployment key. There is one additional tool that we should talk about when it comes to OS deployment, and that's System Center Configuration Manager. This is a comprehensive system management product really targeting the enterprise space to enable you to do zero-touch deployments where you can push out an operating system to potentially hundreds of machines at a time. It has lots of additional functions beyond OS deployment, but when you get into the larger customers where they want this type of enterprise class functionality, this is the next step up from the free tools that we've already talked about. So hopefully that's a good overview of the Windows 8 OS deployment process. And you can take what you've learned as part of this session and apply it with the customers that you're working with. To learn more about the process, we've included a whole bunch of links about ADK, MDT, MAP, ACT, and all the other various acronyms that you've heard throughout this session. You can check those out and read more about OS deployment of Windows 8. Thanks for listening, and hopefully we'll see you deploying Windows 8.